Hello, my friends. Thank you all for joining me. Today on Twitter, I found a website of a story of a woman who went to the hospital to have a baby. And when I read this, it was really hard to get through. But I believe this story had to be carried on. In fact, the family encourages it to be carried on and told. Um, and it's a story about how our hospitals and nursing staffs and doctor staffs aren't exactly the heroes, aren't always the heroes that we believe them to be. I will leave a link to the actual website I am reading from in the description below. But I wanted to read the story because it affected me and they want the story to be told to as many people as possible. So let's get started. Fight for Christy. Her story. Christy is a devoted wife and mother to 5 beautiful children. This story begins early October when she contracted COVID during her pregnancy with Caleb, Matt. Matt, her husband, will be sharing journal entries, a day to day account of her status, treatment, and care she's received from Maggie's Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a UPMC facility. That's kind of like basically a government facility. It's a long read. If this story touches your heart, we simply ask you share the story with your family and friends to spread awareness of how corporate medicine really treats their patients and families. Some of the staff's names have been deleted to protect their identity and prevent retaliation from the hospital. My name is Matthew Cresto, and my wife is Christy. Before we begin, I would like to make very clear that I have the utmost respect for the majority of the nursing staff here at Maggie, giving my wife the best care they can with the tools and options allowed to them. There's a couple of bad apples in every bushel, but the good ones, you know who you are. I can't thank you enough for your kindness. On with the story. She started showing symptoms of COVID-19 somewhere around October 4th, 2021. And on October 8th, late at night, I drove her to Maggie's Women's Hospital as her breathing was becoming labored, and at this point, she was between 35 and 36 weeks pregnant, and with our third son, Caleb Samuel. Upon arriving, she was rushed straight to the OB ICU unit on the second floor of the hospital. After getting her settled in and set up with oxygen, they tested her for COVID. Once her test came back positive, they began talking to us about delivering Caleb ahead of schedule. He was due November 16th according to our math, so this concerned us because he would be premature. The hospital decided to do an ultrasound to get a better determination of gest- gestational age, and upon reviewing the measurements taken from the ultrasound, they decided Caleb was actually 38 weeks and roughly 8 pounds 9 ounces. This would become the first of many lies from the hospital staff. We then asked if, because she was COVID positive, if they would take him from us, and we've heard horror stories about this at other hospitals. The nurse assured us that this was no longer hospital policy, and they would not take him from us, and he could stay in the room with her since she contracted COVID while he was still in her womb. Line number 2. With this information, we agreed to deliver Caleb. Once Caleb was delivered, Christy and I were able to hold him for about 10 minutes, and then they laid him in the bassinet in the room. There he waited for 2 hours before the pediatrician came to see him for his newborn exam. He was not 38 weeks, and he was nowhere near 8 pounds 9 ounces. Caleb was born premature at 36 weeks, 6 pounds 5 ounces, exactly what Christy and I suspected. There was no pediatric staff members there waiting for Caleb. They said they wanted to take him to the NICU just to give him a good look over and some observation. This is the last time we saw our newborn son until the day he was discharged from the hospital. A couple of times a day for a few days, we asked when we could see him again, when she could breastfeed him, as they kept telling us as long as Christy wore a mask, she could breastfeed. Line number 3. He never returned for feeding. Instead, they brought in a breast pump so she could pump her milk for him. Before we go any further, I'd like to make a note of the extremely loose PPE policy in the OB ICU. The whole time I was there with my wife, not once was I asked to put on a mask, gloves, or a gown while in the room with my wife. This was fine with me as I don't particularly believe they work anyway. During Christy's stay in the OB ICU, she was given one dose of remdesivir one dose of ser, ser, sarilumab, sorry if I'm pronouncing all of this wrong, and steroids to try to fight COVID. That's all. Christy was moved up to the adult ICU, and I immediately knew something wasn't right. I was stopped outside of her room and told I had to put on 2 layers of gloves, a gown, face shield, and face mask before I could even enter the room, completely different than the OB unit. After our numerous attempts to have Caleb brought back to us with no resolution, I began to question their motives. This is where things got bad fast. I quietly asked the nursing staff, if I wear all of this stuff downstairs, can I please go see my son? The nurse contacted NICU for clarification, and 10 minutes later I was informed that not only could I not go see my son, I was not permitted to see him until I have quarantined myself away from my wife for 14 days since I was exposed to COVID by being around her. The same COVID he'd already received antibodies for while he was in her womb. I was crushed, and the nurse was so kind as to inform me that this in front of Christy, who's now hysterical because her worst nightmare has come true. They confiscated her child and is now keeping him hostage from us. Thanks, guys. The best we could get was a low-quality webcam live stream of our son in an incubator. The parent bond experience has now been stolen from my wife and child. 2 days later, I was informed that Caleb would be ready for discharge on Thursday, October 14th, and that I could pick him up myself. But he was not allowed back to see his mother. What happened to 14 days? It was too dangerous for me to be around him before, being around my wife every day, but now they're fine with it. Instead of picking him up myself, Christy's mother, Holly, offered to pick Caleb up instead to avoid any further backpedaling from the hospital and then possibly keeping him from us even longer. They permitted me to visit him before Christy's mother picked him up so that I could at least see him and hold him. Mind you, I had just left Christy's ICU room. By now, Christy had been taken off of high-flow oxygen and put onto a BiPAP machine, which is the last step before a ventilator. Her doctor, the ICU medical director, Dr. Murragon, comes off as very pushy and ventilator happy, already suggesting we should put her on a ventilator. I ask why. Now with Caleb and the rest of the children safely under Holly's care, who's also a UPMC nurse and COVID survivor, May 2021, I was able to focus on being with my wife. At the advice of Holly, we requested a consult with a pulmonologist. Later that day, I had to ask again about the consult, and the consult to which we were answered with, "We'll have to check into that for you." The next day, Dr. Murragon returns to explain his position and why the ventilator should be used, and at our request for him to treat Christy's asthma. He said rudely, "No, it won't cure COVID, so there's no point." I argued with the doctor that I still wanted to speak to a pulmonologist, and he very confidently replied, "The pulmonologist is a buddy of mine and will tell you the exact same thing." I don't care. I do not accept your visit as a consult, and I demand to speak with the pulmonologist. He also told us that she's already receiving all the COVID treatment they had to offer, and, quote, "Trust me, we're doing everything we can for her," end quote, and that all UPMC facilities follow the same COVID protocol. Holly can attest to the fact that this is not true. 2 nurses came in after the doctor's visit and explained to us that Dr. Mulligan is very well versed in pulmonology, though he never identified himself as one. I again had to reiterate that I do not care who he is. He is not the person we requested, and I demand to speak to that person. The nurse said they would arrange it, but they wanted to bring a respiratory therapist up first. Sure, why not? Coincidentally, this is one of the same doctors that delivered Caleb down in the OB ICU. Worth noting, I didn't hear it myself, but Christy said he tapped her leg and called her his case study and told me that she's not a lab rat. The RT that came agreed to a liquid form of cobivant, but stated that she won't get much out of it since she's so short of breath. Now that was the original entry, and each entry afterwards is at a certain date. October 15th. Dr. Murrigan came to visit again. I watched him walk into the room wearing all of the appropriate PPE, talked with us for about 10 to 15 minutes, and after making contact with my wife physically, rubs his gloves with hand soap, then walks out of the room wearing all the same, now potently contaminated, PPE, converses with the nursing staff in the hallway, touches things, and then walks into another patient's room across the hall from us wearing all the same PPE, never changing any of it. Staff is supposed to remove all PPE and dispose of it in the patient's room before exiting, and then they are supposed to sanitize their hands once outside the room before continuing on. This would not be the only time I watched this arrogant doctor do this. I've just been informed at 8:30 p.m. that I'm being forced to leave because of visiting hours. Christy is terrified to be left alone. I was told an administrator would be down to explain to me why I had to leave. At 9:45, Jennifer Prybanek, AOD, walks in Christy's room and asks if I have everything I need, now anticipating to be escorted off the property. She then goes further to ask if I need any pillows or blankets. Caught off guard, now I'm confused and I said this is a completely different conversation than what I was left with a little bit ago. She assured me that I was not going to be made to leave, and that given the entire situation so far, I'm free to stay for as long as I need, and that I needed to be here with Christy. Finally, someone with some sense here. Jennifer asked me if I needed to order food, then noticed it's past business hours for hospitality, and offered to go grab me some food from downstairs anyway. The first kind gesture we've seen from Maggie, the hospital. Wake up the next day and Christy says her chest doesn't feel as tight and easier to breathe. Doctor has agreed to give Christy a multivitamin since she was taking a prenatal vitamin already before she came here. Finally, we get to meet the pulmonologist. He is willing to try a few more things so far Dr. Murrigan has refused and 100% agrees her asthma needs to be addressed as COVID will make it worse. He also adds nebulized steroids to her regimen on top of whatever she's already getting through IV, and she may request liquid albuterol every 2 hours. Nothing more to report this day. October 17th, Christy was able to eat normal breakfast using the high-flow nasal cannula with oxygen saturations, staying in the 80s. Dr. Murrigan visits again. He again wears the same PPE in multiple patients' rooms. How is this okay? October 18th. Noontime, and Christy is being switched back to the high-flow cannula for a break from her BiPAP mask. Up to this point, every time they switch her, they turn the heat up on the oxygen machine so that it doesn't give Christy a brain freeze. Every other respiratory therapist so far has done this without question and upon request. The young girl that came and refused to do so, and because of this, Christy became uncomfortable and strained to be able to breathe properly, as her nasal passages felt like they were being frozen. Her oxygen saturation dropped into the 70s, and I had to loudly yell at the respiratory therapist to turn the heat up, as it was hurting Christy not to be warmer. That girl kept insisting that it's the same setting as the BiPAP, which I had to yet again yell and explain. Everyone else turned the head up Everyone turned the head up with the was not at the BiPAP because it was too uncomfortable for her. Sorry, a little bit of typo there, that's why I got a little confused. Finally, she complied, but the damage was already done. Christy couldn't recover and her oxygen stayed around 70%, and she missed her opportunity to eat lunch. Christy's now angry, and it takes the rest of the evening just for her to recover from this mishap. and the gross air leaks coming from the improperly fitted BiPAP mask. We were told that an acceptable patient leak, PT leak, was as high was as high we 100 liters per minute. This is the last time we would see this respiratory therapist. We've been watching the PT leaks as it rose to over 140 liters per minute, and she never returned. To give an example of how bad this leak was, I could see around the mask holding down Christy's nose on either side. Christy's oxygen levels never went higher than 80%. Now 7:30 p.m. and the new RT comes in and checks on Christy. His name is Denny. Denny is very good at what he does and quickly identifies the issue, and within minutes, the leak goes from 140 plus down to below 10. Thank you, Denny. I made sure to convey my gratitude for him being there to others the next morning. October 19th, 9:56 a.m. It's a new day and Christy is starving from missing meals yesterday. We called down to order food from for the both of us, and we're informed that Christy is on a liquid-only diet. Must be some mistake. The person on the other end checks to make sure, and yep, her diet was changed to 30 minutes ago. I demanded to know why from the nursing staff and nurse's name omitted. Bless her heart for dealing with my now overly obvious anger informs us that because of her poor numbers yesterday, they've decided to put her on the liquid diet so she can stay on the BiPAP mask. More to see how she does for that day. Never mind the fact that her condition yesterday was the cause of a neglectfully rude staff member. I refused to eat in front of Christy, so we both went without food for the day, even though she insisted I eat something. Christy refused the liquid diet, and because she was upset, she just sat staring at the clock all day long, waiting for what torture they'd introduce next. She looked like she'd just given up, hopeless, like they've taken everything away from her. After some heavy discussing between the two of us, she was back on board and turned her anger and frustration towards the doctors that were punishing her and did everything she could to prove them wrong about her. I've had enough. It's time to get some more concrete answers. I asked the staff what is it going to take to get Caleb in here to be with his mother so she could have some glimmer of hope. No discussions quite yet, but she would let me know ASAP. This request was made with the new attending physician, Dr. Prius. October 20th. And we have one of her favorite nurses again. The nurse looked over everything and had to talk with the attending about Christy and her limited diet, and was able to get them to give Christy back her old soft foods diet. Wonderful news. She would let us know as soon as the diet is switched over. They're going to have a meeting at 11:30 with me in the family lounge about Christy. We have the meeting and everyone seems to be on the same page, for the most part. Administrators and patient reactions seem more apt to trying to help out. I don't have much to ask for at this point other than getting Christy fed and making sure that whoever switches her over from the BiPAP to the high flow, that they warm the air up before making the switch so that she doesn't have a hard time breathing and drop. Everyone agrees, but her oxygen saturation needs to be in the 90s before they will allow her to eat, since she always drops when they switch over to the high flow. Finally, around 3:45 p.m., they give in a little and let her eat. So we order her a dinner plate and they give her some OJ to drink in the meantime. She immediately starts to feel better. 4:30, her plate arrives and she cleans the entire tray. Also, Dr. Prius has received word back from infectious disease and the NICU regarding letting Caleb visit. We originally presumed he could come on her 21st birthday after the 21st day, after the start of symptoms, which would be around the 25th. But they decided on 21 days from positive test, which would be on the 28th. With the stipulation that if Christy's condition declined and then the ventilator became a likely scenario, that Caleb may be able to come in sooner so she could at least see him before that would happen. Okay, acceptable, one more week. Next day I head home to take care of some things at home and grab some more supplies, snacks, drinks, etc. Christy texts me that she's been ignored all day and that they didn't give her the call button, which is supposed to be used to call in case she needs something or needs help. At this point, she's already tried taking her leads off So it looks like she's dead and nobody came in at all, and she needs help calling in a food order. I call the nurse desk, and the girl that answers tells the nurse to go into her room and hand her the call button. 20 minutes later, Chrissy texts me again, sending me a picture of the call button, set on the shelf next to the bed out of reach. What is going on here? I call back, and the girl says the nurse already went into the room and gave her the call button, and she says my wife never mentioned anything about ordering food. Cool, so the nurse is lying about taking care of my wife. The rest of the day was uneventful, so nothing else to report here. October 22nd. 6 more days until Caleb can come meet mommy. Christy's oxygen saturation is up to 98.99%, outstanding. She sat up more than she was ever able to before, allowing the weight of her body to pull her diaphragm down to get more oxygen in. She feels great. The plan was to possibly start waning down the settings on the BiPAP machine, but she dropped a little this morning due to having to roll a lot to go to the bathroom. The beeping from the monitors was giving her small anxiety attacks, so the nurse set it so it would stop alarming inside the room and only out of the hallway for them. Nothing else to report today. For those of you who might be confused at this point, when they say to drop, it means that her oxygen levels in her blood are dropping. October 23rd. 100% oxygen saturation. Wait, never mind, back down to 90. And now her heart rate and blood pressure are up. Complains of groin burning and pain lower back around kidneys. They take a urine culture and want to take blood cultures, but at this point she's been poked and prodded so many times she refuses the extra needles. They give her antibiotics anyway. She's back up to the mid 90s, even while trying to carry on conversations with the BiPAP mask on. October 24th. They tried to get her situated to go to the bathroom again, and she dropped down to the 50s and had a really hard time recovering. I was originally going to leave early in the morning and head up to Holly's to pick up the kids, as 2 of the boys had doctor appointments on Monday the 25th, but I couldn't leave until she was okay enough. I asked Dr. Prius if that exception could be made so Caleb could come see his mother, because I was concerned how many close calls she had left before she just couldn't do it anymore. He agreed that it might be time to begin contacting with other departments for consideration. I would already have the boys later. The plan would be Monday after the doctor's appointments to take Caleb in, and the rest of the kids would stay home, with my parents watching them. I got word from Dr. Prius that because she improved later in the day, they decided to hold off to see how she did. Once again, the plan was pushed aside for having having the kids. I was unable to return to see Christy that night. October 25th. I take the boys to the doctor's office and everything goes well. Update Christy on everything with the boys, and I spend the rest of the day with them at home. Video chat with Christy around 11:30 p.m. She looks good. Alert. Responsive talkative. This is the last time I get to talk to her for a while, because as of as of November 21st, 2021, Christy is still sedated and not recovered, because that would be later on. October 26th. I wake up to 3 missed calls from the hospital. It happened. At 7:30, they decided to put her on the ventilator because when they tried to get her situated to go to the bathroom, she dropped way down to the 20s and couldn't recover. My heart sank. I called the hospital and talked with a nurse practitioner, and he says she went willingly as long as she was fully sedated, to which they complied. I called my dad and rushed to the hospital as fast as I can. October 27th to present. With the help of friends, we quickly go to work searching for treatments, medicines, anything that can help her. We've found tons of studies of ivermectin on the clinical trials worldwide database. Effects of vitamin C and quercetin. Effects on direct correlation between vitamin D deficiencies and length and severity of COVID. And benefits of zinc. All being NIH publications, and I bring these up to the doctor here, and they all decline everything, stating that none of it will help her, and it's all waste. I even offered to pay out of pocket, and they still refuse it. I've never felt more useless in my life. Currently hopeless and helpless to help my wife. I tried invoking the right to try law of 2018 and was met with the determination that it was written for a different era and that it doesn't apply to COVID. Even worse, by the way, guys, that is 100% false. Like, blatantly false. Even worse, Dr. Murrigan, Dr. Gosman, and the Vice President of Medical Affairs, and Elizabeth DeBavie of Patient Relations ambushed us in a family meeting, and of course we immediately refused to meet with Dr. Murrigan as we are now convinced he's trying to kill Christy. Dr. Murrigan leaves the room and we're informed that if we want to have a clinical medical discussion that he has to come back in. If not, then we will talk about options for having Christy moved to another facility. The VP of Medical Affairs refuses to have a medical discussion. We're also informed that should we decide to transfer her out, she is not welcome to any other UPMC facility. Basically, we are slapped with an order to deal with Murrigan, who has a serious God complex, or get out. Elizabeth and Dr. Gosman declined to having the discussion recorded. We come to an agreement that Dr. Murrigan is to stay out of Christy's room and have no direct contact with her or myself, since there would be no other physician made available to us while Dr. Murrigan is on duty. I asked Elizabeth to print out some of the studies we found on the vitamins, thinking maybe that if the staff read over the NIH publications, that it may sway them to reconsider giving Christy extra vitamins. We were met with a hard no once again from Dr. Murrigan. I was seen by Heather, nurse practitioner, and Amber, nurse lead, and I pleaded my case to them, told them again that I will pay out of pocket, and that I wanted the doctor's refusal of a reasonable request in writing. Heather agreed with me that it was a reasonable request just to check her vitamin levels and agreed that if her levels are depleted, there should be no harm in correcting them. Later that day, I see laboratory test results for vitamins A, B6, B12, D3, and E, all listed now, which means someone signed the orders for them. Hopefully that maybe we were getting somewhere. I later found out that it was Heather that signed the orders, not Dr. Murrigan. Don't care, still the result I wanted for the day. Next morning, I'm meeting with Heather and Amber again, this time with a completely different attitude. I was informed that they would not be supplementing her vitamins regardless of what her levels are because that's not something they do. I didn't give much of a response as I realized I lost the last battle I had to fight. She literally signed the orders just to shut me up. Faced with the hard truth that my wife might die because nobody with decision-making ability gives a damn about my wife and wants to deny her simple basic medical care, I later get Heather alone in Christy's room for clarification. She agrees with Dr. Murrigan's decision not to treat depleted levels. I'm speechless. This woman had the audacity to lie to my face last night and give me false hope. She later catches me in front waiting on my dinner to arrive. I don't remember what she was saying and I completely ignored her. She then patted me on the shoulder and as she was leaving it took everything in my being not to tell her not to touch me and get away from me. October 31st, Halloween. I'm supposed to be trick-or-treating with my kids, and where am I? Still at my wife's side even though she's fully sedated. Why am I here, you ask? Because I'm terrified that I'll get a phone call and she died under Dr. Murrigan's care and I can't bring myself to leave. They've successfully robbed me of another life experience with my child. Awesome. Also to note, Christy has been running a fever of around 102 for a week straight. Infectious disease came down to see her and switched up her antibiotics and determined she has some form of fungal infection, bacterial infection. Things just get worse. November 1st. Night nurse, name omitted, confirms that she's heard from most of the staff that Dr. Murrigan is a prick and cannot believe that they're withholding simple vitamins from Christy. Worth noting, every day we get a daily plan of care that's printed out. Every day it says they've ordered compression sleeves for her legs to prevent blood clots. It reads as follows. My blood clot prevention device is Sequential Compression Device, SCD. Your doctor has ordered special leg sleeves to help decrease your risk of getting blood clots. It is important that you wear them at all times when in bed, or as ordered by your doctor. To prevent falling, call for your nurse to remove your SCDs before getting up to walk. She hadn't had them even once, nor have they ever been discussed with us, and now they think because of one of her lab results she may have blood clots somewhere. Oops. Sorry. November 3rd. Today I meet with Bill, RT director, and a physician's assistant to discuss the risk-benefit of flipping Christy onto her back again, knowing she did not tolerate it well the last time they tried. We all agree they had to at least try because they need to be able to check her skin for sores, blisters, rashes, and scan her limbs for blood clots since that was now a concern. While they were in the room, I brought up a few concerns with them. First, the last of the SCDs that are on the daily care plan, but more so why nobody has verified that the information on the daily care plan is correct and accurate. I asked if anyone actually reads what they print out, and nobody could answer. This doesn't sit well with me. I told the PA that I had already asked for other members of the nursing staff around 5 times looking for clarification to no avail, and she seemed very surprised, as this was the first time she had heard of the issue. Bill suggested if it wasn't getting an answer, I could have reached out to him as well, and we would look into it. To which I simply responded, after asking 5 people, I'd assumed that I wouldn't have to contact the director of the department that had nothing to do with the question needing answered. He agreed. Adding to this, I share my concerns about what happened if she had clots and the devices that were designed to prevent these clots were never used, even though they're on the paperwork saying that they were in use. The PA said she would look into everything and get back with me. It's now nighttime, going into the fourth, and Christy's doing very well on her back. Oxygen saturation staying in the mid-90s. Temperature slowly coming down, as is her heart rate. November 5th. A new day, a new attending physician, Dr. White. Seems like an okay individual. Dr. White has removed the leg sleeves from the care plan since they're not being used and said that the Levanox she's on is more than sufficient to prevent clots, though they confirm she is a superficial clot in her arm. I give him an NIH article about the NAC and thought he should read over the article. He dismissed it as something to be done very early on with COVID and would not help in her advanced stage. Holly talked to Rob, one of the nurse practitioners, about some of Christy's compression sores from being prone for so long, giving specific doses of the vitamins she would receive to aid in wound healing. Rob and Dr. White did not object from a wound care standpoint. Nothing exciting over the next few days, no real improvement to speak of. November 8th. Christy was doing fairly well, all things considered. Her oxygen saturation has been staying in the mid-upper 90s and with less than 100% oxygen from the ventilator. Randomly, her saturation dropped to the high 70s to low 80s and didn't move. The nurse today wasn't as attentive as others and also didn't give her nearly as many bolus of sedatives. When Christy was fighting or out of sync with the ventilator, it took all day for her to get back up into the 90s. It seemed harder and harder for her to maintain since they took her off of phenobarbital. Also today, we met with the new attending for this week. Yes, another. This attending is about on par with Dr. White. Her name is Rachel. She agreed to look over the NAC article as I felt Dr. White just dismissed it without reading it, and then said she would send it over to the therapeutics committee for review. Around 9 p.m., or so I hear, a buildup of fluid in the tubes coming from the ventilator, and Christy's breathing is very fast, close to 50 beats per minute. Denny comes in and opens where the tubes meet, the tube going into Christy's mouth, and drains out the fluid, and her breathing slows down immediately. Apparently, a buildup of fluid can trigger a ventilator into thinking it's trying to take another breath when she clearly isn't, causing it to force another breath. Good to know. November 9th. I was invited to join in rounds, and they discussed the plan for Christy. A few topics we went over. We discussed the possibility, or lack thereof, of lung transplants if her lungs can't recover. No hope there. She has to recover first. Discussed what needs to happen for her to have a tracheostomy. Again, she has to recover first. Rachel is concerned about her constant fever and pointed possibly to a central IV line in Christy's neck. Suggested a midline instead. I advised Rachel that I had already suggested that, and that's when they put in the PICC line instead. Rachel suggested taking out the central and putting in a normal IV line, and I advised her that was a terrible idea as Christy has very small veins and IV lines do not last long at all for her. Rachel mentioned possible infections from the line, which I pointed out they draw blood cultures just yesterday, and she agreed to wait to see what those look like, or if the site of the line starts to get red. They decided to remove another sedative, this time ketamine. Around 11 p.m. now, I hear a buildup of fluid in tubes again. This time I grab the nurses to have it drained before it became an issue. The nurse, instead of opening the tubes to let the fluid out, lifts the hose to make it flow back into the machine. As soon as she does, the Christie begins a 2-minute-long coughing fit where she stops breathing. I believe some of the fluid went down to Christie's lungs. They get her suctioned out, giving her 2 bulbs of fentanyl and a push of rock, which is the paralytic they use to stop her from breathing on your own. This wouldn't normally concern me, except the nurse received a phone call from I don't know who, but she told the person on the other end that they weren't in the room, and Christy randomly dropped into the 50s, completely leaving out the fluid in the tube and how she drained the tube. A little white lie, but a lie nonetheless, and it made it sound like Christy just randomly started desaturated. I've now seen at least 4 times a day where Christy shows signs of becoming conscious again. The ventilator starts alarming, and then I see Christy's jaw move, nostrils flaring, and once saw her eyelid open and start to open slightly. Every time they have to give her more Verst and more rock. November 11th and 12th. I had to go home the past 2 days to take Caleb to his 1-month checkup. First actual good news in a while. He's perfectly healthy. He quickly caught up to where he should have been at full gestation. Now, 8 pounds 6 ounces, 20.5 inches long, almost exactly the same size as Colin at birth, and almost on his due date. Christy unfortunately hasn't had as good of news. They removed the Verst and put her back on propofol for sedation. She is stacking her breaths more now, so her saturation isn't as high as before. Vent settings now 18 PEEP at 100% oxygen, barely holding saturations in the upper 80s throughout the night. This morning, thankfully, her breathing calmed down some and she's back up to 91-92, but still not as good as previous days. It's amazing what you can find out when you look through medical records. I requested a copy of all treatments and medications that Christy had received so far and received it last night. According to UPMC COVID protocol, the proper course for remdesivir is a 6-day course beginning with a 200 milligram dose, followed by a 100 milligram dose each following day for 5 days. She received the first 200 milligram dose, and then every subsequent dose was marked not appropriate at this time. So on top of them refusing any other kind of treatment, they didn't even finish off the one treatment they did offer. So much for we are doing everything we can to her. Dr. Betsy Eads, a frontline doctor, reached out to me this morning with some things we need to be doing and demanding. Hopefully it helps because this hospital is killing my wife. Tonight they came in to try to replace her central line in her neck with another PICC line in her right arm. The ultrasound nurse did an ultrasound and couldn't find one of the veins they usually used. The second vein was way too small, surprise, surprise. And the third was big enough already carry high-risk flying because of its location and how it routes through her shoulder area. This, coupled with the fact she already has a clot in her left arm, puts her at even higher risk of clotting more than, and the IV nurse told me that she could place the PICC no problem, but she'd be really upset for Christy if she had to come back in 2 days to remove it because it clotted so fast. Christy's nurse confirmed there's nothing wrong with the central line. They just want it out as it's a possible source of infection. The resident again was suggesting a normal IV, but the IV nurse highly advised against that for a couple of reasons. She had tiny veins and started IVs would fail for Christy, and propofol is an irritant that would cause burning sensation in her arm since there isn't enough blood flow to quickly dispense the medicine. Thank you to the IV nurse for sharing the information. I guess I'll have to try something else. Something to note. They kept checking her glucose levels, and she's consistently in the 160-180 range. I question this, being that I'm diabetic and I know what range I stay in and what a normal human is supposed to be. I was told 160 to 180 is perfect when in ICU, and they do not give insulin below 200 for ICU patients. Residents say they used to, and patients did worse. Holly contradicts this, though, saying wounds can't heal properly with high blood sugar. Labs all say normal range is 70 to 99. I've always went with 80 to 120. Some doctors have told me 100 to 150 is diabetic. November 13th. Overnight was uneventful. Ventilator settings are still the same. They had her fentanyl down to 250, but overnight increased it to 350, which is still lower than a couple of days ago at 400. Currently waiting on rounds. Nurses this morning tried to draw labs from the central line and unfortunately is not giving blood return, so she tried to draw blood in Christy's hand. Of course, her veins are too small to hit even with the ultrasound machine to help. November 14th. They attempted to turn her head so they could move her central line from one side of her neck to the other, concerned it's a possible infection source, and now it's not given a blood return for labs. When they tried to turn her head, she quickly desaturated down to the 40s and was in very bad shape. Seems a shared concern is no longer when she will get better, but when will her body give up? For what it's worth, a lot of the nursing staff seem genuinely concerned and upset for her. The resident mentioned the drop could have possibly been caused by a cuff leak around the tube when she tried moving her head. Now she's flipped back on her stomach again. Saturation is better, but she's paralyzed again. Back to square one. The last 3 weeks, a complete waste and setback. November 16th. Today wasn't a terrible day. They moved the tube 1 centimeter down further in her throat. The theory is because the tube had been placed for so long that the cuff at the end of the tube that seals her airway may have slightly deformed her trachea, causing the leak to saturate and her saturation dropping when they try to move her. Seems logical. Looks like that was the issue. She's been in the 90s all day, even with them lowering vent settings. Throughout the day, it's now 10:45 p.m. and they went from 100% oxygen at 18 peeps down to 85% at 16. She's still at saturation in the low 90s. Perfectly acceptable. Far from out of the woods, but at least she's not going backwards again. November 18th. Yesterday I had to leave the hospital to go home and restock my meds. Meal prep, do laundry, and finally see a chiropractor. They flipped Christy onto her back for a little bit around 10:30 and she did okay. Around 2:30 she didn't seem to be tolerating it well, so they flipped her back onto her stomach. She remained that way for the rest of the night. Overnight being on 85% oxygen with saturations in the mid-lower 90s. This morning they decided to flip her again, and as of 12:30 her saturation is 91, though they would have her back up to 100% oxygen. Let's see how the rest of the day goes. Worth noting, last night I received more of her medical records and spent a few hours going through them all. Nothing jumps out at me. Still doesn't add up that she went from being perfectly fine around 5 a.m. to being extremely anxious at 6 a.m. and having to go on the ventilator at 7 a.m. because her oxygen saturated plummeted. I just don't understand what caused her to go south so fast. Nurses note saying that at 6, Christy complained that the BiPAP was giving her cold air, which could cause anxiety. No one mentioned after that. No, November 19th. Last night was quite emotional for me. Christy had been doing well. Oxygen saturation stayed in the mid-lower 90s. I went to go grab something to drink from the vending machine outside the ICU. When I came back in, I noticed that oxygen was down 87, 88, which isn't terrible, but odd that it was fine moments before. I sat my drinks down and stood beside her hospital bed and watched her. I noticed that usual little thing like her slightly breathing over the ventilator, which would have indicated she wasn't 100% paralyzed. Not a big deal. She's not fighting it. So why rock the boat? Wait a minute, her eyebrows are moving around. That's not supposed to happen. I said her name out loud and she stopped moving. I asked her if she could hear me. If she could, move her toes. No response. I asked her if she could move her eyebrows and she did. I was blown away. I wasn't totally sure it wasn't just a coincidence, so I asked her a couple of questions that would require a yes/no answer. And each yes, she moved her eyebrows again. A wave of joy and happiness rushed over my being, entire being, and I started crying, telling her how much I loved her, assuring her that I have been here the whole time and that I miss her so much. First time in over 3 weeks, I've actually had a visual response from talking with my wife. Sure, it wasn't verbal, but we talked to each other. I ran and grabbed the nurse to tell her about it, and she said she thought she saw Christy moving her eyebrows a little while ago, but didn't put any thought into it. She comes in and asks Christy to move her toes. Nothing. Asks her to move her fingers. Nothing. Asks her to move her eyebrows like she did for her husband, and she did. Even the nurse was floored. Only problem is, now we know she's awake and aware, and knows she's paralyzed and probably freaking out. They increased her sedatives and Parallax, so she's out again. It was a beautiful moment, and while it lasted, but it's a good sign for now. Nothing really new this morning. Still on her back. Saturation still in the 90s. They're turning off the paralytic right now to see how she tolerates it. She's still being sedated, but at least now she won't be paralyzed. November 21st. Today is the last day Dr. Prius will be attending until after Christmas. He respectfully hopes he doesn't have to see us when he comes back. Christy is holding steady, eyes open halfway. Some very slight movement left right, blinking is still a little slow. Some head and shoulder movement, but that's about it. She's still very sedated. Oh, and she just moved her fingers finally. Oxygen had been holding pretty well as well, and now at 85% on the ventilator, and her saturation is in the low 90s. She recovers a little easier from the coughing. Still a very long way to go before she's out of here, but I'll take it. Next concern is Thanksgiving week. Caleb has his picture of Tuesday. Emma is having lasagna with my parents as well. Back and forth travel with the kids a lot this week. I'm staying with Christy as much as I can this week, though because Morrigan is back tomorrow, I genuinely fear for her life when he's here. I know most of Tuesday and Wednesday I'll be gone. Some of the family work Thanksgiving, so plan is over weekends sometimes. But so I'm staying here Thursday. Please pray Morrigan keeps his talons off my wife and she stays safe. Thanksgiving, so the past few days have been better than most. Christy is completely aware of her surroundings. She's now moving fingers independently and hands are at the wrist. Both feet wiggle around a bit. Very clear yes no head movements. Shoulders shrugs, lifting her arms a small amount. Eyes actually moving better as well. She spent a couple of days with the respirator setting to spontaneous, which means it only delivers a breath when she initiates it. That's a good sign. She's doing the bulk of her own breathing like this, which is great. Breathing about 20 times a minute, and the ventilator set to 80%, 16 peep. Complete night and day from last week. Caleb had his newborn photos Tuesday. Holly was phenomenal as always, but here's the best news so far. After Caleb's photos, we went straight to the hospital and mommy and baby boy were finally reunited, and that Christy can remember. It was an emotional time for all of us. Caleb was fussy until I laid him in her arms, and then he calmed right down and fell asleep laying on mommy. It was a beautiful thing to see, after all the hospitals put us through. Christy wears colored street nails and Friday her nurse noticed that she was wearing a set and also wears them. She said she had a set of Thanksgiving strips from last year she would bring in and redo Christy's nails for her. Her and two other nurses Sunday night took off all of her all nail strips, and applied a new strip for her. This is way more than going above and beyond, and it meant a lot to me that they would do this for her. God bless you, ladies. For what it's worth, the nursing staff had been the best part of our time here so far, and I respect each and every one of the nurses that have taken care of Christy. Maybe I don't say enough, but I hope these ladies know how much I appreciate everything they do for her. It's not their fault that those with decision-making powers will uphold the system values and treat patients like numbers and dollar signs instead of treating patients as individuals with more personalized treatment. Yeah, cookie cutter only works in baking. Sorry, not sorry. November 26th. Yesterday, the most of the day, Christy's saturation was in the mid-80s, but as evening progressed, she kept dropping lower, eventually hitting mid-low 70s. They decided to paralyze her again and put her back on her stomach. She's now back in the mid-80s. As much as I hate this place and those in charge, nobody's to blame this time. I saw it all happen myself. All we can do is watch and wait and pray she turns around again. November 29th. Looks like we are seeing the beginning of the end. Yesterday, Christy's saturation dropped as they did a chest x-ray. Found that she has a pneumothorax, which is air stuck between the lung and lining. They put in a chest tube. All of this began around 8 a.m. This hospital felt it was perfectly okay to wait 4 hours before contacting me. Here comes the rant. I have a little secret. Maggie, the hospital, has been aware of the existence of the website and Facebook page of the website and Facebook page. They sent out a mass email to the entire ICU staff as well as the MDs and some administration. The email originated from Brittany. Don't have last name on her. Advising staff not to talk about it, comment on it, or share it and uphold the system values. But someone is checking it regularly. I've known about the email since Tuesday, but didn't let them know. So you mean tell me that this hospital has no problem watching me and what I post, say, share, but couldn't have the foresight to tell my wife was crashing for 4 hours. This is beyond unacceptable. I asked if I should be coming back, and they said that they would let me know. I'm hours away from the hospital and unable to drive myself there. The hospital calls me again a few hours later to inform me Christy's heart had stopped, but they were able to restart it, and that they should um, consider coming back. Thank God her sister Kat was there and is able to take me there. We get there and they stop us from at the front desk, holding us there because security had to escort us up. Now my blood starts to boil. We get up to unit and there are two people with her. I don't remember who, but I lay onto them and I made sure to level the and I made sure the level of dissatisfaction was well understood. Come to find out, they had shut off all sedation, giving her nothing for pain. My wife has spent all day, literally over 12 hours, laying awake and aware of, and most likely in a lot of pain. I quickly asked why they were off, and nurses put them back on. I don't remember much of the rest of the night after that. The morning, her SATs are up, saturations are up again, but now it seems like her kidneys are failing. It's just countdown to the end at this point, it seems. November 30th. Things are looking worse. Her kidneys are failing, liver function decreasing, potassium is climbing, and there's no sign of it stopping. They installed a dialysis port and will begin treatment in the morning. Long shot, but worth trying. December 1st. I slept at her bedside in a chair, holding her hand all night. Her hand was cold and clammy. I haven't seen her eyes. Eyebrows or lips move all day. Things are getting rapidly worse. Her temperature, which used to be fever, is now turning into hypothermia. Her face is now lifeless and her pupils are fixed, wide open and dilated. She's no longer breathing over the ventilator. It's like she was on a paralytic again, but she wasn't. She just lay there. There was a tree with no breeze. Her kidneys seemed to be responding to dialysis, but now her liver quit and her blood sugar is quickly dropping to dangerous levels and her blood pressure keeps dropping. This is bad. As the hours wind down, her temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure keep dropping. They give her 2 IV meds to bring her blood pressure back up, but it's just a band-aid for what we now realize to be a permanent problem. She's gone already. All that's left is a heartbeat. Her only organ that didn't completely give up already. The meds are maxed out now and can't go any higher. Her heart rate and blood pressure are continuing to fall. 70 beats per minute becomes 60, which becomes 50, which becomes 40. After this, it becomes much quicker. We say our goodbyes, and Holly, Cat, Jima, I guess, her oldest daughter, and I are all holding her hand, shoulder, etc., and her heart rate slows below 20 beats per minute until it just stops. It is now 8:09 p.m. and my wife is now gone for good. A life wasted but didn't need to be, all because of a health system and doctors, administrators that care more about profits than actually taking care of people. Let this be a lesson to you all. Never trust a loved one with any UPMC facility if you value their lives, and for God's sakes, don't ever go to Maggie's Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In closing, on behalf of my family, I would like to personally thank all of the following people for giving my wife every chance they could with the limited tools they were given: Macy, Ricky, Andrea, Jenna, Jenny, Cole, Eponine, I guess, Amber, Marissa, Bill RT, Denny RT, Bill RT Director, Dr. White, Dr. Prius, and the rest of the nurses whose names I regretfully can't remember right now. God bless you all and thank you for every last moment you gave me with my wife. Christy, the love of my life, the mother of my 3 children, and my best friend. We didn't get nearly enough time together. What was supposed to be a lifetime was barely over 6 years. You are my rock, my life, my world, and my everything. I can't imagine life without you, but I guess I don't have a choice anymore. I'm going to miss you so much. I may have failed to protect you from this, and I am sorry for that. But you have my word. Your children will know you, and will remember you. I am so thankful that you had the opportunity to finally see and hold Caleb. Such a beautiful baby boy, and I hope you have some peace knowing that he still remembers you, even though this prison took your time with him away. I will always remember you, always love you, and always miss you. Till death do us part just isn't enough. Until we meet again, beautiful, I love you so much. You will forever be my always. This is the last entry of Christy's story. I dedicate this website to her memory. Thank you all for listening, and God bless. When I read that, my heart just absolutely broke. Like, this is what happens when hospitals are given, government permission to go after um, profits. It didn't start. I don't know when it started, but it really ramped up after 2009 when the ACA came into play. And it's just a complete mess. This is why I fear hospitals, which is ironic because while I'm not going into hospital per se, going to hospital field per se, my specialty is going to be in labs that will be in contact with hospitals. So it's just harrowing to read this. So I just want to pray that let's see his name. I will pray that Matthew Christo and his entire family, his kids, his mother-in-law, his mother, all the people who know him, find peace and that they can find justice. Because this story is just absolutely horrible to witness. So I just pray that everything turns out well, and I just pray that God watches over them and hopefully continues on Christie's memory. I also hope that this story can be heard to a lot more people because more people need to hear about this. In Jesus' name, amen. So I just want to thank you all very much for watching this. Don't share this video necessarily, but please do share the story. Again, I will link it in the description below. So I just want to thank you all very much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.